Recording has begun. And ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to Paul Daniels.
Okay, thank you, Roger. And thank you, everyone. I'm down in Kochi in Shikoku. And today's presentation, Lighten the Load, Computer Scored Assignments in Moodle, is really just to help us lighten the load by having Moodle auto-score some of our activities. I'd like to just share that this is more of an beginner intermediate presentation. So those that are looking for more advanced presentation, sorry, this is going to be geared more towards just the regular teacher. Yeah, I see Gary left, so that's good. No programming involved. Okay, so I'll get started right away. This is also a split session. There's another presenter coming in 45 minutes. So I'm going to be kind of moving fairly quickly through this. And I'm going to be talking about computer scored activities within Moodle today, specifically the 4 skills, reading, listening, speaking, and writing, with a focus on speaking because that's my area. And okay, so most of the activities I'm going to show you today involve the standard Moodle quiz. So this is a standard part of Moodle where you can add a quiz. You can add several different activities, but this is specifically, most of the activities today are adding a standard Moodle quiz. Now you'll notice on the right side, within a quiz, there are different question types. So some of the question types are standard. That means when you get your Moodle installed, they already come with Moodle. For example, things like drag and drop and embedded close activities. But there's also some non-standard quiz activities, which I'm going to talk about, or they're actually called question types. And one of those is called speech assessment, which auto scores speech. And the other one is auto scoring writing. So those are 2 question types that I'm going to talk about later that are not part of the base Moodle. They have to be installed separately. Okay, so I'm going to start just with the reading tasks. One of the activities we're using at our school is the Moodle Reader. And if you want to know more about the Moodle Reader, you can go visit moodlereader.com. But the nice thing about Moodle Reader is all of the questions are already created by teachers all over the world. So there's lots of questions. For example, after the students read the book, they take a quiz. The books are all from the graded reader libraries. And the quizzes, again, are all based on the content from the books. Probably some of you have used the Moodle Reader. Of course, you can make your own questions in Moodle for reading activities. But if you really want to set up something simple, dead simple, all of these questions are already created. So you can just thumb through the database, and the students can choose some books that if you look at the bottom, they can choose a book. And then if it's in your library, then they can go ahead and take the quiz. The quiz includes some multiple choice, general multiple choice questions about the book. There's a nice drag and drop activity where they can put events in order. So again, this is not really reading comprehension, but just to check whether they've read the book. And it gives you some really nice reports at the end where you can check on your individual students. In this case, this is our individual classes to see how many quizzes they've taken, how many books they've read, how many words they've read. So it gives you a lot of auto-scored activities and statistics that you can do fairly effortlessly. Okay, the next one I'm going to talk about is computer scored listening. Again, this is nothing new. For years and years, Moodle's had listening activities that you can create and score. This is just a reading from my textbook where the students go through and do a close activity. This is just another example of a listening activity where they listen to the question, and then on the right, they have to choose the answer. So it's like a question, answer, question, answer. So just different types of listening activities that are auto-scored. I'm running through this fairly quickly because I think most of you probably know already about the listening and reading. The receptive skills are quite easy to create. But a little more exciting is the productive skills, the writing and the speaking. I'm going to first talk about the computer scored writing. So Moodle by default doesn't have computer scored writing, but it is something that you can add, an add-on. You could, with the basic Moodle, you could provide a score just for submitting an assignment. And I'll just talk about that quickly. So let's say you have like a weekly journal for students and you want to just score, give them a score if they handed in their weekly journal. So you can do that within the base Moodle by creating a quiz activity with 2 questions on the left. The first question is just a text input. And the question number 2 on the bottom left is just a simple yes/no question where it says, I agree that this report is my own work. Now, if they click yes, then they get 100% for question 1 and 2. Okay, so question 1 is not actually scored, only question 2 is scored, but they need to complete both question 1 and question 2. Of course, if they chose no, then they're not going to get a score. So that's, it's very simplistic, but it's just a way to give a basic score for submitting an assignment. Okay, we can get a little fancier with a question type called the essay auto grade. And again, this is a non-standard question type in Moodle, so it does need to be installed either by you if you're the administrator or the administrator of your Moodle site. But once it is installed, then it comes up in the regular Moodle question types. Okay, and the question type was designed by someone called Gordon Bateson, who's done a lot of work with Moodle. He's actually my colleague down here in Kochi, right next door to me. So if you do have any questions about this, you could either contact myself or Gordon about this. So just a little bit about the auto grade writing. There's different ways that you can score writing. One of them is by countable items. So you can set up to count different items. For example, you can count, you'll see a list there on the bottom right, the statistical items. You can count characters, you can count words, sentences, paragraph, unique words, long words, characters per sentences. This is just a basic statistical count of items, and you can base a score on how many characters, for example, or how many words, how many sentences that you want the student to submit. So again, fairly basic, but again, you are able to give the student a score for their participation, their writing participation. It also has another function called target phrases, and you can set up some bands, grading bands, and you can give students points for using these target phrases in their writing. For example, you'll see here target phrase 1. If the word for example is used, then you can award the student, for example, 5%, 10% of the question grade. So if you're teaching them specific phrases to use, then you can give them some scores on the target phrases. There's another section on the bottom here of common errors. So if you have several errors that are repeated in class, you can actually penalize the student on those errors. So you can set up some minus scores for those errors. So again, it's not anything, for example, there's a lot of probably better auto-graded testing or auto-graded software out there. For example, some of the standardized test companies are using auto-grade. This is fairly basic, but you have to remember that this is, it's an open source project for Moodle, so you're getting it for free. And it's not, I don't think it's something that you can, use as 100% of the student's score. You can use it possibly as, a partial grading for the student. lighten your load, not let your load be completely free. Okay, I'm going to jump into the computer scored speaking. And again, I apologize for moving through this so quickly. I'm going to be talking about the speaking portion, probably the longest, because that's the portion that I'm most interested in and that I'm working on. The computer scored speaking is also a non-standard question type, which means if you get the default Moodle, it is not part of the base Moodle. This needs to be installed separately. So it's called a speech assessment question type. Okay, and if you're interested in downloading and installing the speech assessment question type, the URL is down at the bottom, the github.com. You'll see the name in the image there is Igor. That is the programmer that I'm working with from Russia, who is creating the software with me. It's called a Moodle question type S assessment, speech assessment. And basically what it does is it auto scores speaking activities. It lets the teacher add customized content, and it also gives some learner feedback. Okay, I've been working on this project for 9 years now, and these are just some of the newest functions that I've added in 2020. So I'll just go through these quickly. It has video and subtitle support. So if you're having students do any type of video work where they're listening to video and then speaking, I don't know if you've used something like English Central before. English Central is very much based on video. If you want to set up your own videos for your class, instead of using something like English Central, you can also use this plugin for Moodle. It now has user feedback, so it highlights, or at least attempts to highlight, some problem areas that the speech recognition didn't catch when the student spoke. It has multilingual support, so if you're teaching languages other than English, for example, Japanese or Spanish, French, it does have multilingual support. It has an option to show and hide transcriptions. So actually what's happening in the background, I'll talk about this a little bit later, is that Moodle is using Google Transcribe in the background. So when the student speaks into Moodle, it's going to the Google speech engine to transcribe it. Now, sometimes those transcriptions, especially for second language learners, are not very accurate. And if the student is looking at the transcription, typically they're going to be distracted because it typically is not going to understand everything that they say. Okay, so the next thing is I just made the recording button now flashes red, so the student knows that they're actually recording when they're doing a speaking activities. I've been working a little bit with some mobile support. Unfortunately, on the Apple iPhones, they don't support the Google Transcribe. So I've been working with Amazon Transcribe. I'm having limited success. It works, but it's much slower. It's not real-time transcription like Google is. I think Poodle, if you've ever used Poodle, Justin Hunt's software Poodle for Moodle, he also uses Amazon Transcribe. So typically what it does is it saves the student's audio file, then it uploads it to Amazon, and then it gives you back the transcription. So it's definitely a bit slower than using Google. And then on the very bottom there, you can see that I actually have a choice in each question if you want to use Google or Amazon as the speech recognition engine. So there's a choice there. Again, I find Google is much faster, but it's not supported by mobile devices. Okay, so basically, if you want to add a auto-scored speaking activity, you just go ahead and under the edit mode in Moodle, and you add a standard Moodle quiz. So the quiz is standard, but then after you add the quiz, you come up with the question type. And if you don't have the S assessment question type, which is on the far right there, if you don't have it installed, you will not see that. So just once again, this is not a standard question type. It does need to be installed. If you want to try doing it yourself later, these are the arrows, the steps that you need to follow to add this type of question. I won't go through this now, but if you want to follow along later, you can give it a try yourself. Once you add the question, there's lots of choices on the bottom. I'll just go through some of the most important one. The first thing on the top is the actual prompt that the student's going to see. Now, the prompt can be text. The prompt can be an audio file. It can be a video file. It can be a picture. So the prompt is the question text, and that's what the student's going to first see when they come into the question. Okay, and then down on the bottom, there's some choices here. The first one is to show or hide the transcription, and I talked about that later. I often like to hide the transcription so that the student doesn't get too hung up on looking at their transcription and whether their utterance was correctly transcribed. There's a button there to save the audio. So if the teacher wants to go back and listen to the actual audio file, they can choose that. And then there's some text analysis. For example, same with the writing. You can have the speech, you can have it count the number of words that they spoke, the number of sentences. So we can show or hide that text analysis, which is actually the text of the speech. And then at the bottom is probably the most important part. That's the target answers. And that's what you hopefully want the student to speak, the target answers. So you can put in several target answers. And if the student speaks one or more of those target answers, then they will get credit. Okay. I think someone's microphone is probably on in the back. All right. Thanks, Roger. You grabbed it. Okay, so the target answers, again, is what you expect the students to speak. And again, you can put in several target answers. You can put in dozens and dozens of target answers, and they only need to speak one of those target answers. All right, so what can you do with this? This is just an actual activity. This is a simple listen and speak. So they're going to click on the button to listen, and then they're going to start recording, and they're going to record it. So that's just a basic listening and speaking activity. If you've done any work with shadowing, you can put up some video. And earlier I talked about the subtitles. So this is the subtitles, which are actually part of Moodle already. Moodle has subtitle functions. So you can upload video with subtitles. The students can watch, listen, and read along if you want to put the text. And then, of course, they can also speak what they are listening or reading. So you can have a shadowing activity, perhaps somewhat similar to the experience that they would have on English Central, where they're watching a video and speaking the lines. Although here I don't call it speak the lines. So it's maybe a shadowing activity. This is another activity you can do where the students look at a picture and describe it. This is something that is quite popular with the ACAN test. So there might be a question like, describe what's happening in the picture. And then those prompts that I showed you earlier here on the very bottom, you might want to put in several prompts. For example, if you're working with the present continuous ing, the girl is walking the dog. The boy is eating ice cream. The man is sweating. The man is taking his jacket off, putting his jacket on. You'd have to put in quite an extensive list of different prompts that you would expect the student to say. Okay. Basically, you can take any type of textbook task and turn it into a speaking task. Typically, any textbook has dialogues, question answers, reading comprehension, grammar activities. You can take any of these textbook tasks and make them into speaking tasks. There's just a short example from a Longman's book that we used, where it's an A-B, so the computer's A and the student's B, speaking along in the conversation. Some dictation I use quite often. I'm teaching a technical English class, technical speaking class, and we're practicing numbers here, numbers and units, so that students are practicing speaking 6,500,000,000 people. You can do something a little bit trickier, for example, random word order, where the students are looking at something, you did, what, arrive, time, and then they have to put that into the correct order or speak that in the correct order. For example, what time did you arrive? You can have a speak best response where the student is listening to a question and then they have to choose the correct response. For example, how often do you exercise? And the student would have to speak every day. So just choosing out of those three choices. You could do something even a little more open-ended. For example, retelling a story. So if you have some specific target words that you want them to speak again as they're retelling the story, you can have them do something like that. Or you can do something completely open-ended. And the open-ended questions, for example, talk for 30 seconds about your weekend. This is a 3-day weekend. What did you do over the 3-day weekend? Again, here, an open-ended question is going to be scored not on target phrases, but it's going to be scored on how many words, for example, you need the student to speak, or how many words per sentence. So as I showed you earlier, those text statistics, the same thing that I showed you in the writing type question. So you can give the student a score on open-ended questions. I often use this open-ended for the presentation practice. So there's, just a way to enforce or force them to practice for their presentation. They can speak their lines for each slide of their presentation beforehand. And I also introduced recently a function where the student could enter some text as the prompt, and then they can speak that text. So if they're doing a presentation practice, they can enter their text that they're going to speak for example, slide 1, slide 2 in their presentation, and then they can actually go ahead and speak those lines. And then this software will compare the spoken translation, the transcription of the speech with their text that they entered. Okay, so that's just an example of the activity that I did with the video. I have a dream that my 4 little children one day will live in a nation. And you can see the parts in red there are the parts where there was a mistake or the computer didn't understand the transcription. And then it gives them a score based on how accurate their text transcription matched the target transcription. And then on the bottom, that's what I was talking about, the open-ended, the text analysis speech, where you can collect some data and give them a score based on word counts, unique words, number of sentences, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And the other nice thing about this is it does have some personalized speaking feedback. Again, it's not entirely accurate. A lot of it has to do on how well the audio quality is, the students recording with a lot of background noise, the microphone quality, the recording quality. There's lots of issues that can hinder the score. But it does give the students some feedback on what parts in red that were not recognized. Okay, so I'm not going to get much into the actual scoring algorithm of the speech part, but it does check on a phoneme level. So that what that just means is that if the student gets a part of the word right, they can still get some credit for it. So it's not looking at the entire word, comparing the entire word, but it's comparing the phonemes within each word. That's just some quick data from a speaking activity that I gave recently in my class. And you can see just probably what you expect, that most students were somewhere between 75 and 80% out of 100 on this particular speaking score. And that seems to be pretty much the average for my students. Okay, so I'm going to end here and turn it over to the questions. I know I ran through that fairly quickly, so we do have some 15-20 minutes for questions. And also, if you want to follow up later with some questions, you can either email me or we can move to a chat room. Okay.
So, sorry, of course, my house phone is ringing, of course, in the middle of the session that I'm hosting. There was a question on the chat from Steve. It says, what are the browser limitations and requirements for the speech assessment question type? Okay, great question. And there's always a million things that I forget to put in my slideshow. Yeah, so if you're using the Google as a transcription engine, then it must be Chrome, which is why it doesn't work on the iPhone. Now, if you're using Amazon, then it will work on Safari and in Chrome. I haven't done much testing with Firefox, but I assume the same is true with Firefox. The Amazon will most likely work, but the Google Transcribe will not. So I tell all my students, please do these speaking activities within our computer lab. I know that a lot of them like to work with their iPhones, but I like to keep things simple and have them do it. Most of the work they can do on the iPhone, but the speaking part, I have them do in the lab with a nice headset or at home with a nice headset using a desktop or notebook PC in Google Chrome. And I guess the next question is just in general, what's the situation with mobile devices overall?
The situation with...
Does it work on mobile devices is what the question says.
Okay, so I showed a lot of things today. I mainly focused on the speaking part. So if you're talking about the speaking part, that's the trickiest one. The first three I showed, the reading, listening, and writing, all work with any browser because they're not relying on the speech recognition. If you're doing the speaking, auto score speaking, and you want to use a mobile device like an iPhone, then you have to choose the Amazon Transcribe. I haven't had the best luck with it because sometimes the students click on record and there's quite a delay and they get frustrated and they think they're recording, but it's not actually recording, and then they stop recording, but it actually hasn't uploaded their entire speech segment. So it's something I'm working on. It's not 100% efficient on the mobile devices.
Does anybody else have a question for Paul? Feel free to unmute and ask, or do the Zoom hand raise thing.
I'm actually thinking I rushed through that too quickly now because we still got 15 minutes. I hear someone in the background.
That was probably my children screaming upstairs. Not a question about Moodle.
All right, well, bring them in for a question anyhow. So, yeah, I just, I'd like to just point out that if you do want to install either the auto score writing or the auto score speaking, please feel free to contact me. Again, the auto score writing is my neighbor just next door in my office, Gordon Bateson, who is developing that. And I can definitely forward your questions or answer the questions myself about the auto score writing. And the auto score speaking, I can definitely help you get that installed if you need to. I also have a demo server that I can give you access to if you want to have a play with it before you install it on your own server.
All right, well, why don't we have another big round of applause for Paul Daniels? Thank you very much, Paul.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Paul, before we kick you out of here,
okay,
I got a quick question for you. How easy of an install is it? I mean, I know a lot of plugins now can be installed directly from the Moodle plugin directory.
Mhm.
Is this one you have to go through GitHub? So is it different?
Yeah, so I submitted this to Moodle and I haven't heard back from them yet.
Yeah.
Gordon has better luck because Gordon's been working with Moodle headquarters for many, many years now. So
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
his plugins get automatically accepted. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
my plugin is not accepted yet on the Moodle site. So you do have to download it from GitHub and then you have to unpack it. It's a zip file, I think. And then you have to, upload that either by FTP or.
Yeah, so you need FTP access, or you need somebody with FTP access to get that done then.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, probably your Moodle administrator. So yeah, it can be an issue. I know it's an issue for our school. Our administrators only like to update things once or twice a year. So we have to ask them once or twice a year to go to GitHub, download the latest plugin, and then install it.
All right. Well,
Yeah, thank you.
thank you very much, Paul. That was super interesting. I am going to end the recording.
Okay, thank you.